A sharp decrease in atmospheric pressure on Earth, its fall to a critically low level, that is, to the present one, put a fat cross on the existence of all giant animals on our planet. Not only huge dinosaurs disappeared, but also all those whose body parameters did not fit into the new framework. These are giant sloths, huge indricotheres, and wolves weighing a ton, and, of course, giant people. In any case, they could no longer exist on the surface. And so, the Earth freed up space for a new dominant being, the ordinary human, that is, us with you. Yes, I know that in reality our self-designation is slightly different. We call ourselves, that is, a rational human, but you understand that calling us irrational is a very big exaggeration. Smart, yes, cunning, yes, but definitely not rational. We are too easily swayed by emotions, feelings, the influence of psychotropic substances, and programming methods. In the end, mundane anger, fervor, greed, pride, any of these emotions are constantly present in any person and very easily cloud the mind and even the conscience somewhere far away. So we can't be called rational by any means. And after the atmospheric pressure dropped, the gods, that is, representatives of other civilizations, remained somewhere deep underground, and their guardians, titans, golems, giants, and other controlling entities partially perished and partially also hid in shelters. We were left alone. You are on the Epoch of Distrust channel with Mikhail Kalmikov, and we continue the story started in the Aliens Base video. Any coincidence of the story with real events is either logical or accidental. The Itak Guardians, left alone on the surface of the planet, people without proper management, degraded. There are plenty of examples: Polynesia, Australia, New Zealand, Africa, South and North America, Far East, Kamchatka, Siberia, Yakutia. All people suffered. The whole planet turned into a single wild world. No, not all of it. The Mediterranean, the Near East, and Europe showed signs of civilization. It's a small piece of the total land area of the planet, summing up to no more than 12 to 15% of the total land. But in this part, civilization did not perish but tried to recover. What distinguishes it from the rest of the Earth? The mild climate of Europe. Well, in the area of the central Russian upland or on the same territory of modern United States of America, it's not any worse. Did the Mediterranean Sea allow trade to develop? Well, what about the Caribbean Sea, the Japanese Sea, the East China Sea, all of Indonesia? The conditions for trade there are not a bit worse, and the climate is pleasant. Can you then say that the largest iron and copper deposits are in Europe and the Mediterranean? Again, no. The largest known iron deposits on the planet are located in Bolivia. Yes, and there are quite large ones in India as well as in northeastern China. And the largest open-pit copper mine is also not in Europe, but in Chile, that is, in South America. In other words, the beginning of civilization did not depend on the presence of any resources. Then what? It is believed that the first civilization arose in the Near East. The Sumerian Akkadian kingdom, that is, the ancient Sumerians. They primarily spoke Akkadian, a language about which we know almost nothing. Well, how do we not know? Of course, a lot has been written, but we don't know the exact pronunciation of those or other words. All assertions about how this or that word sounded start with the words we assume or we think, that is, it's not exact. Where did such a name as Suma come from and what does it mean? But it's all quite simple. This name was given by researchers and decipherers of the 19th century, and it means people of the Sumer region, Sumerian people. That's the explanation that seems to explain everything. And at the same time, it explains nothing. The strangest thing is that the very name of this people is completely different. But for some reason, historians decided to give it this name, It is believed that the Sumerian Akkadian language is one of the oldest Semitic languages, so there should be some similar words and meanings in the modern language, at least in terms of phonetics, just like any Russian can relatively freely read Bulgarian or Polish-Ukrainian texts. Many words, despite different pronunciation, are still spelled the same and pronounced the same, except that the stress is placed in a different place. There are only 6 existing Semitic languages at the moment. These are Amharic, Tigrinya, Assyrian, Neo-Aramaic, Maltese, Hebrew, and the most numerous, Arabic. Therefore, it's quite easy to check. Only in Hebrew there is a word that sounds similar. This word is shumer. That is, a keeper, a guard, a watchman. It turns out to be an interesting thing. The first civilizations on Earth are officially considered to be keepers. That is, the Sumerians. Keepers of what? From whom? It is obvious that keepers of some knowledge and at the same time guards of some territory. It is from the Sumerians that we first learn about the pantheon of gods. Their number is simply huge. Enki, Ishtar, Tiamat, Antu, Gilgamesh, Baal, Enlil, and others. There are about 700 deities in total. Everyone has their own story, everyone has their own parents and their own children. Later, these gods moved on to other pantheons, Greek, Roman, Egyptian. For example, Apollo, Artemis, Athena, Ahura Mazda, Bes, Hercules, and of course Yahweh, and many others. All of them migrated into later civilizations directly from the Sumerian list of gods. It's puzzling, and the fact that the Sumerian civilization started somehow, abruptly, unexpectedly, right off the bat with knowledge about city building, metal and stone processing, knowledge of the basics of irrigation, agriculture, literacy, and a ready-made mythology. And also disappeared abruptly more than 4,000 years ago. However, the oddities do not end there. Greek and then Roman civilizations also seem to appear out of nowhere by themselves. However, if you look closer, you can notice a couple of nuances. Here, for example, is the Greek one. According to mythology, the goddess Rhea hid in Crete from her husband Kronos in the Dictaean cave, where she gave birth to the future supreme god Zeus. Here, it is directly stated that the gods of that time, the first gods, hid deep under the earth from someone or something. And considering that they were hiding from Kronos, that is the god of time, it is directly stated that the gods in the underground shelters survived the time, Kronos, if not anabiosis. That is, on the island of Crete, there is possibly one of the entrances to the ancient refuge of the gods. Well, okay, but what about the Egyptian civilization? On the one hand, we don't seem to have any direct references to a connection with any catacombs. However, the story begins with a sudden twist. That is, according to the official version, there have been some scattered tribes around the Nile for a long time. Then gradually they create an upper and lower kingdom with unclear methods of governance. Suddenly, around the 3rd millennium before our era, about 5,000 years ago, a character named Menes appears, who took everyone under his control, introduced mandatory worship of the gods, introduced the practice of sacrifices, and also gave the unfortunate wild farmers literacy, for which he proclaimed himself the first pharaoh of Egypt and built the city of Memphis. And then he reigned on the throne for another 63 years, until he died in a hunting accident from a random hippopotamus bite. Moreover, note that he united both kingdoms practically without a fight. In any case, none of the historians mention a single battle with him, so his authority was already unquestionable then. And knowing that he died in the 63rd year of his reign, it turns out that he made his moves around the age of 18 or 19, and that with a great stretch. Can you imagine a man at 18 possessing outstanding skills of a regiment commander, a hunter, literate, educated, full of knowledge about the gods and their pantheon, and also capable of building cities? In principle, any modern teenager could do this if he was drilled with all this knowledge at school for 10 years. But if it was he who brought literacy to the Egyptians, then who gave him the knowledge? And suddenly we remember where he is from the small town of Cheni in the far south of Egypt. The town itself has long since disappeared, and there are disputes about its location, but it is known for certain that it was somewhere near Abydos, so close that by modern standards it's practically one city or a suburb of Abydos. But in Abydos, things are much more interesting already. According to legends, it was here that the head of the deceased Osiris was buried and then miraculously revived. It is here, according to the same legends, that the path to the kingdom of the dead begins. And it is here that mysterious hieroglyphs have been found with images of a helicopter, a tank, and an unidentified flying object. And in general, according to the Turin Papyrus, Menes was not the first, and there were even more ancient dynasties before him, ruling for thousands of years and having divine origin. Well, now the puzzle has become more complicated. Here are similar motifs again. The gods went to the underworld, somewhere deep, but left a passage for the chosen ones, or to choose for themselves. Apparently, one of such chosen ones was Menos, who later united Egypt. It's clear that this information about Egypt is far from complete, and we will talk about Egypt again at the end of the movie. But for now, let's take a look at another civilization, the Roman one. The plans of the gods. Although the Roman civilization had a huge and even decisive influence on all subsequent history, its foundation at first glance seems to have nothing to do with the gods hiding somewhere underground. It simply absorbed all the previous civilizations conquered by it, including the Greek, Egyptian, Celtic, Persian, and even the Sumerian, through a many times mutated pantheon. This is from one side. However, as the saying goes, things are not that simple. How did it happen that a bunch of soldiers managed to defeat civilizations, albeit belatedly, supported by ancient gods? Legends about the emergence of the Roman Empire vary. In one legend, it's the descendants of Aeneas who escaped from Troy, who was, among other things, the son of the goddess Venus or Aphrodite, from a mortal man. Interestingly, during the Trojan War, in which the gods directly participated in battles alongside humans, Aeneas was saved twice. One time he was saved by the pair of gods Aphrodite, that is his mother, and Apollo, and the second time he was saved directly from Achilles by Poseidon himself. Why would the higher-ranking gods suddenly save some mortal, even if he is the son of Venus? After all, Venus herself initially understood that to save from death is a terrible act for a goddess. That's why she gave him the name Aeneas, which translates to terrible. Nevertheless, the gods cared very much for his health. What interests us at the moment is the fact that the founder of the Roman Empire was the son of a goddess. There is another legend about the founding of Rome. This is the well-known story from school about Romulus and Remus, two brothers who were raised by a she-wolf on the Capitoline Hills. And although it seems completely different, it's not. According to her, Aeneas founded not Rome, but the city of Alba Longa in the province of Latium. After about 500 years of ruling the city and the province, his descendants, brothers Numitor and Amulius, did not share the throne, as a result of which Numitor's sons were killed, and Rhea's daughter was made a Vestal. However, the god Mars, again a god, came to her, and Rhea gave birth to his two sons, Romulus and Remus. Amulius, upon learning about this, in anger beheaded her for it, and threw the brothers into the river. and from there they were saved by that very same she-wolf. By the way, when they grew up and regained power in Alba Longa, they decided to build a city in honor of this event at the place where the she-wolf had pulled them out. But they disagreed on some details, and Romulus killed Remus and then founded the city of Rome. That's the story. On the one hand, Rome was founded by descendants of gods, even twice, either just the son of Venus or the son of Mars, the grandson of Venus. On the other hand, something did not work out for them with brotherly love. Fratricide flourished as nowhere else, apparently some congenital defect. Nevertheless, all this family was in the plans of the gods, even 500 years before the foundation of Rome, even before the Trojan War, with the beginning of another story, of course interesting. But where are the secret catacombs of the gods? Yes, they are right in sight, and no one hides the Roman catacombs. These are whole labyrinths of underground premises and passages, the total length of which at the moment is more than 150 kilometers. Interestingly, it is believed that early Christians who were persecuted hid there and organized mass burials. At the moment, more than 750,000 burials are known in these catacombs. Where they end and where they lead has not been fully explored to this day. Interestingly, a very significant part of these catacombs is located in the Vatican and apparently has been handed over at least partially to the Apostolic Archive, that very Vatican archive of all knowledge of the planet. Of course, a mere mortal won't be able to get in there. But the Vatican itself on its website says that the total length of all bookshelves in it exceeds 75 kilometers. And this means that since the Vatican State itself occupies less than half a square kilometer, either these corridors lead somewhere very far or very deep. In principle, both options are possible at once. In any case, this only speaks of the library. And besides it, under the Vatican, there are also classic catacombs where hundreds of bodies are mummified. There lie the Roman popes and simply influential people. The only thing that's not there is a connection with the old gods, since the Roman Empire is the youngest of all. It only has a connection with the modern Abrahamic gods, and particularly with Jesus Christ and the Old Testament Yahweh. And all Abrahamic religions, starting with Judaism and ending with Islam, they assert that God is one and only, sometimes indeed triune, but still He is one. It was precisely with the permission and direction of the Roman popes that the Inquisition flourished, burning people for a different faith. As by the way, some fanatics still behave to this day. Especially punishable among Christians then and now is considered witchcraft and various forms of prophecy, clairvoyance. After all, one of the main tenets of Abrahamic religions is that God's plan is fundamentally unknown to anyone. And clairvoyance is an exceptionally presumptuous and wicked act inspired by the devil. And therefore, it would be very strange to find in this heart of the Christian world, in the Vatican, traces of worship of ancient pagan gods. Correct? That's what most people think. Vatican? Let's take a little detour from the main storyline here and ask ourselves a question. Has anyone ever wondered what the word Vatican actually means and how it came about? Many will now recall the popular a few years ago and quite curious version that the word Vatican should be read as Batu Khan, that is, Khan Batu and his Khanate. A curious version with a lot of supporters, but after all, the Vatican as a state appeared in the 14th century, which is much later than the reign of Batu Khan, so most likely this is a hypothesis aside, but in fact the official version is even more interesting, and for this you do not need to delve into conspiracy versions, it is enough to look at the quite official one. And so the word Vatican was first used in the so-called Lateran Agreements of 1929, when it was necessary to come up with a name for the dwarf state within Rome. And then they decided to use the name of the place, that is, the hill on which it was located, Monte Vaticano, the mountain or hill of Vatican. That is, before this, the hill seemingly had no relation to Christianity. But this is not the answer we need, even if it's just a hill. What then does the name of the hill mean? It turns out that on it, even in the times of the Etruscans, there was a temple dedicated to a specially and deliberately forgotten Roman god who bore the name Vatican and was able to predict the future, possessed the gift of clairvoyance, and the predictions of the priests of this god were called Vatas. That's already more interesting, but let's go further. We know that the entire Roman pantheon of gods was borrowed from other civilizations, but the lion's share, of course, is from the Greeks, and practically every Roman god has its predecessor or analog among the Greeks. For example, the Greek Ares is the Roman Mars, the Greek Zeus is the Roman Jupiter, the Greek Hermes is the Roman Mercury, and so on. And this means that the Greeks must certainly have an equivalent of this strange, forgotten, literally erased from the history of the Roman god of the Vatican. And he really does exist. This is Prometheus, Zeus' two-faced brother. He was particularly distinguished by his ability to foresee, which his name directly indicates. Pro, that is forward or ahead, and meti, that is thinking, considering, that is thinking ahead. By the way, it was for this, not for bringing fire to people, that Zeus chained him to a rock. According to legend, Prometheus knew who would raise a rebellion against Zeus and kill him. It was this information that Zeus wanted to extract from him, resorting to torture, including chaining him to a rock. By the way, in the end, Hephaestus freed Prometheus and persuaded Zeus to make peace with him. Prometheus gave up the traitor and they lived happily and amicably, but not for long. In case anyone didn't know. Although it doesn't exclude the other. And it's quite possible that both events existed. And Prometheus really, above all else, gave people knowledge. So, what do we get? The Vatican literally bows in its name to the ancient pagan god Titan Prometheus. And this god also literally gave people knowledge. Yes, and the Vatican itself stands on his temple and in fact bears his name. Although officially it seems to be watching the whole world for clarity. That is, it turns out, the entire Catholic world with Roman popes at the head bows not to Christ, not to Yahweh, but to Prometheus. But wait, both Prometheus and Jesus knew what would happen next, that is, they were clairvoyant or prophets. Both brought new knowledge to people, they were teachers of people. Both Prometheus and Jesus were crucified, one to a rock, the other to a cross. Both Prometheus and Christ being crucified endured sharp piercing objects. One had his liver pecked out by an eagle, the other was struck in the side by the spear of the legionnaire Longinus. Despite this, both survived. One was forgiven and renounced, while the other was resurrected. Such coincidences cannot be possible. Although, if the authors of the New Testament simply composed it, why not take a plot from Greek mythology as a basis? Such phenomena are just next to us to this day. But no matter what, there are also key moments here. Underground, the ancient god who gave people knowledge and his followers apparently also emerged from there after the catastrophe. And in particularly privileged cases, those buried there are still revered to this day. Well, okay, are there any other similar coincidences? Yes, plenty. For example, the official history considers that Russian civilization began with Cyril and Methodius. So, a real civilization, not these all kinship-based farmer unions. We guess with you that in reality it's not like that, but in this case I'm interested in the official version. That is, the fixed, recognized moment of acquiring knowledge and skills in the form of literacy. That is the appearance of Cyril and Methodius to the people. And they also brought us the great gift of literacy, not immediately. First, they spent a long time studying in a monastery called Polychron in Turkey. That is, it was in this monastery that they struggled, inventing an alphabet and language for us. I told this story in more detail in the film The Unexpected Adventures of Cyril and Methodius. However, the name of the monastery speaks for itself. Polychron, that is, a multitudinous repository. Or as a translation option, multitemporal, that is, long-term. Straightforwardly, a refuge. And the name of the mountain he was on is also telling, Little Olympus. That is a small place where gods live. Again, the underworld, gods and knowledge. By the way, let's see what's going on with the big main Olympus, which is in Greece. Anyone wishing to start the ascent to this mountain will most likely start it from a tiny town at the foot with a population of only 7,000 people, but with a very telling name, Litochoro. That is a stone repository. Interesting, isn't it? On the great Olympus Lithochrone, on the small Olympus Polychron, again the gods, an underground refuge, a repository, and knowledge, including literacy, which they give to people, having chosen from there. However, the Titans themselves cannot choose from there, since the atmospheric pressure on Earth is now comparable to cosmic vacuum for them. To support life, they need scaffolds and exoskeletons. As a temporary measure, they are quite suitable, but for constant life on the surface, not at all. Let's draw an interim conclusion. Sometime after the repeated catastrophe, after the Earth's atmosphere density critically decreased, the atmosphere and biosphere began to normalize. Not the Titans themselves, but the people they took with them crawled out of the bunkers. The keepers, possessing knowledge and capable of controlling the surviving civilizations in the name of the gods, guide their path of development. However, it seems that not all shelters and bunkers were successful. The ones that were in the Mediterranean region, Europe and North Africa had the highest survival rate. Titan Mahach. Most likely, the bunker survived on other continents as well, but there apparently major problems arose with getting to the surface. So large that cutting a way back to the surface was far from immediate. And it took a long time, possibly decades. Meanwhile, the Sumerian pantheon of gods continued to explore the planet and analyze the destruction and losses. Apparently, contact with most of the base enclaves of civilizations was lost. But initially, this hardly disturbed them, as there was a more important task to grow the human population and revive civilization. Around this time, some event occurred which we may never know about, but for some reason, a war broke out among the gods. In the Greek version, it was a war between the Olympians and the Titans, as a result of which the Olympians won and the Titans were thrown into Tartarus. However, this is a simplification. The thing is, they were all Titans in reality, and the god is just a role that a specific Titan held. In our case, it was Zeus. And the Olympians, accordingly, are an organization, a government, a hierarchy. Something like our modern power structures. For example, the Komitet Gosударственной Безопасности, or just the leadership of a collective farm. Yes, all Greek gods without exception are just Titans. Starting with the father and mother of Zeus, Kronos and Rhea, who were Titans, yes, and their parents Uranus and Gaia were also Titans. That is, all without exception. Greek gods are just Titans. And the very word god in this context is just a status, a duty, and it is not always achieved by the best. For example, the same Zeus was deprived of the gift of foresight, unlike his double brother Prometheus, who was initially, by the way, on the side of the Titans, but then thanks to his gift saw who would win and switched to the side of the Olympians. What did the Titans not share? Contrary to the popular opinion that Zeus just wanted to avenge his father Kronos, there is an alternative version. According to the testimonies of unknown ancient authors, united by the collective name Julius Hygen, the reason for this war is that after Hera saw that Epaph, born from a concubine, rules such a large kingdom, Egypt, she wanted him to be killed during the hunt, and also called the Titans to drive Zeus out of the kingdom and return the throne to Kronos. When the Titans tried to stop the sky, Zeus, with the help of Athena, Apollo, and Artemis, threw them straight into Tartarus. And on the last Titan, who was their leader Atlas, he imposed the burden of the sky. Even now he is commanded to hold up the sky on his shoulders. That's how it is. Apparently, Atlas is holding up the sky and can't even move for repairs, because if he shifts, the sky will fall. And Epaphus, because of whom it all started, is apparently that very man with divine lineage who ruled Egypt long before Menes. So let's summarize. First, the war of the gods in fact was the war of the Titans. Second, the Egyptian enclave apparently suffered greatly, and the leadership was entrusted to a half-blood, half-Titan, half-human. Apparently, his power extended not only to people, but also to the Titans of the Egyptian enclave. Discontented, the giants resolved to overthrow the rule of Zeus and his dominion. 3. But Zeus outsmarted them. He attacked the Titans during the maintenance work, called the installation of the sky, and left only the Titan Atlas alive, on whom all the weight of this work was dumped. An interesting nuance. The Titans were engaged in the installation of the sky as it is understood. Before this, the sky did not exist or someone destroyed it. Perhaps in this case, under the sky is meant not the Earth's atmosphere, but a dome half destroyed after the next strike in the underground bunker refuge. After all, the sculptures of the Titans in architecture usually support not the sky, but the ceiling. What actually suggests the fact that the Titans from one refuge decided to seize power in the second refuge, and all this before the official history of people. It says a lot that something very wrong started to happen in terms of salvation. I suspect that the disaster, as usual, was complex, that is, it was the result of several reasons coinciding. Firstly, it's the decrease in atmospheric density. Secondly, most likely the loss of the ability to personally control people. It was necessary to urgently do something, to create some substitutes. And thirdly, the loss of connection with their creators, gods or God. One of the options for the development of events assumed taking power into their own hands and developing a new scenario. Possibly terraforming the planet to suit some kind of species, one civilization. And for this, it was necessary to either destroy all the others or completely block their access to the surface. And all this needs to be done in a relatively short period of time, since people in their majority still do not possess knowledge and are little different from domestic animals in terms of development, and the Titans are actively dying out and becoming stupid due to lack of oxygen. It's not possible to evolve and adapt quickly. Where are the bones of the Titans? By the way, about bones and evolution, one of the mysteries of paleontology is why some representatives of the animal world developed bipedalism, or simply put, two-leggedness. The thing is, it's absolutely unnatural in our modern conditions. And although it is officially considered that this method of movement gives great speed, in reality, everyone perfectly understands that this is not the case. Another more reasonable theory suggests that it is most likely related to the mixed environment of existence. Part of the time animals lived on land and part in water, which is 800 times denser than air, and therefore it's more comfortable to stand on 2 legs in it than on 4. Although here we understand that in reality things are not at all like that. and we have a huge number of animals leading a semi-aquatic lifestyle, but none of them have stood up on two legs. Except perhaps for humans and penguins. Nature considers that with such a lifestyle, it is much more important to develop webbing between the fingers for greater speed in the water than to stand on two legs. Nevertheless, there is one rational grain in this theory. The density of the environment plays a big role. Therefore, the mass standing on two legs in living beings at the beginning of the Mesozoic era must have been related to this. Look, if the density of the atmosphere is much higher than the modern one, for example 10 to 20 atmospheres and more, then it begins to have a stronger influence on the way of movement. Swimming, flying in it like in water is still impossible, but pushing off from it is much more convenient and effective. You won't fall as fast as you do now if you lose your balance, and therefore the forward shift of the center of gravity and the quick stop of two legs becomes less energy consuming and a faster way of moving than on four paws. In addition, you can briefly increase your weight by reducing the load on the extremities. I went into this moment in detail in 2 episodes of the Mesozoic Dragons movies. In fact, if the body became even larger, it had to stand on 4 legs again, because you can't argue with physics. So, after the catastrophe, when the density of the Earth's atmosphere fell to the present, physics interfered again. All large bipedal dinosaurs died out. Just like all the others, their mass did not allow them to withstand the increasing load on the extremities. For quadrupeds, the limiting weight became something around 5 tons. It is believed that at the moment, the largest terrestrial living creature is the savanna elephant, weighing 10 to 12 tons. But this is an exaggeration, as they very rarely reach such a weight. And the average weight is just those same 4 to 5 tons. And yet, the life of these elephants cannot be called easy. So, if you are a person 4 to 5 meters tall or taller, then with the increase in pressure due to this weight, it will start to press on you much harder. The load on the spine will sharply increase. And for this, you will have to increase muscle mass. At the same time, the total weight will increase even more. You will need even more muscles, and sooner or later this race will end with you either completely transitioning to a water lifestyle, or more likely you will lean forward heavily and fall onto your hands. It's even better if you grow your arms longer and shorten your legs so you don't have to lean as much. That's how we get a gorilla. You don't think that her hands and fingers developed as a result of leaning on the ground while moving on land, do you? Of course not. At the beginning of its evolution, the gorilla walked on 2 legs, or more likely jumped from tree to tree. She still does that now. And although walking on 2 legs for a gorilla or other primates is not a big problem, they still prefer to move around, leaning on their front paws. No matter what scientists say about high speed on 2 legs. Although no, gorilla is a much more recent adaptation, but there were also larger variants. These are giant apes. Their height was 3 meters or more, and outwardly they resembled a modern gorilla. Although this is what they tell us, as for some completely incomprehensible and mysterious reason, only its jaws have fallen into the hands of researchers over the past 90 years, and even then in a very incomplete state. And one more find, possibly a shoulder bone. Possibly. Accordingly, we see a picture with you created by the imagination of paleontologists based on the analysis of these very shells. Once again, for the first time these teeth were found in Hong Kong in a Chinese store selling folk medicine. There, the teeth of these Gigantopithecus were sold as dragon teeth. In other words, in China, there was a trade flow of their remains. But even so, not even fragments of skulls, let alone skeletons, have been found to this day. for 90 years? Seriously? In other words, if we're looking for remnants of ancient titans, they're most likely to turn up as these Gigantopithecus or Iguanodons if we're looking for representatives of another civilization and another race. A stranger among his own? Around the year 2014, researcher and founder of the LAI organization, Andrei Yurievich Skliarov, widely known for his stunning research on megalithic architecture around the world, suddenly decides to drastically change the direction of his research. Until then, his laboratory was primarily engaged in the study of ancient megalithic structures in Peru, Bolivia, Mexico, Japan, Turkey, Iraq, and, of course, in Egypt. Moreover, the studies were conducted specifically from an engineering perspective. It is to him that we owe the widespread popularization of all possible saws and cuts of megaliths with unknown high-tech tools. And not only for that, with his charisma and talent, he managed to give a powerful impulse to the alternative in our country. And although he also made mistakes, one of which I analyzed in the video, namely Skliarov's mistake, but this does not diminish his enormous contribution to the development of research. Only those who do nothing make no mistakes. So in 2014, according to his own words, his laboratory of alternative history has gathered an extraordinary amount of evidence of the existence of ancient highly developed civilizations.
I will summarize briefly, just in time to wrap up. So the first most important conclusion, as I see it, the fact that in ancient times on our planet there were traces of some highly developed civilization is present. They exist, moreover, a highly developed in a technical sense civilization, possessing advanced machinery production. There are so many traces of these. We found thousands of signs of high technologies that, in my opinion, the question of whether there was or was not a highly developed civilization here in ancient times, I consider already closed. There are traces. This is 100% proof. Second, this 100% proof undermines the very basic, the deepest contradiction to the approach we have now, which is being sown now in our relationship, in the academic relationship, in the relationship of academic science to ancient legends and traditions. We see that this was done by some highly developed civilization. This civilization's capabilities greatly surpassed those of our ancestors. And the facts are there. So there were some entities, no matter what kind, but those whom our ancestors called gods.
It's hard to disagree with him. That's why he made the decision to drastically change the direction of his research and switched from gathering evidence to studying what actually happened in those unforgettable times. For this, he and his team studied a huge amount of chronicles, traditions, myths, legends. He was particularly interested in the conflict of the gods Baal and Yahweh, for which it was necessary to study the Torah and the Old Testament, Ugaritic mythology, and other accompanying documents. As a result, his book Yahweh vs. Baal was published, Chronicle of the Overturn. It was conceived as a trilogy, but only the first part managed to come out. However, this is more than enough. In it, Andrei Skliarov meticulously analyzes Old Testament sources and reconstructs events from the beginning of Abrahamic history to the Exodus. And the following conclusions. If we discard all the unnecessary husk, we see how one specific entity, carefully hiding its name, shrouded in fog, cloud, and other visual effects, is looking for artifacts scattered around the earth. Some of them pass on to their prophets, like Moses' staff, for example, to ease the search and hiring of new adepts. Adepts are needed to conquer certain objects which possibly were protected by the people themselves. The people were chosen almost randomly. To him, this God, it didn't matter at all who would execute his will. But at that moment, most of the people were already serving their gods, so they had to choose those who were not suffering from honesty. Moreover, the text of the Old Testament mentions more than once that Yahweh himself often went mad at the ability of this people to betray quickly. At least twice he was close to completely destroying all his followers and starting all over again with another people. The first time when during their stay at Sinai they made themselves a golden calf. Then it all ended with a mass slaughter. The second time, when the spies returned from the Promised Land and reported about the strength and numerical superiority of the armies of the peoples who lived there. The Jews rebelled and refused to go to war. And then the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud in the midst of the tent of meeting to all the sons of Israel. And the Lord said to Moses, "How long will this people provoke me? And how long will he not believe in me, despite all the signs?
Miracles that I have performed.
Among them, I am amazed. I will wound him, and I will bring him down, and I will make from you
A house of the Father.
your
People
are more numerous and stronger than he is." Numbers chapter 14. This happened in the second year of the Exodus from Egypt. Nevertheless, Moses somehow managed to persuade Yahweh not to destroy the people completely, and the punishment was replaced by the very same 40-year wandering in the desert until all those who rebelled died their own death. Thus, this God absolutely didn't care what kind of people he would have in subordination. The main thing was that they did what he needed. And what he needed was the following. Firstly, to take possession of the Machpelah cave where Jacob had buried Adam and
Eve and
some artifacts of other gods. Possibly, there is another entrance to the underground bunker. Secondly, he needed to get to Jericho and take some other artifacts that are not mentioned anywhere in the Bible. However, it is said that in the battle for Jericho, Archangel Michael personally participated for the first and last time. Apparently he was following the meticulous execution of the order not to take any trophies after the victory. None. Absolutely. That is, everything that was left after the victory was meticulously inspected by Archangel Michael himself. Something very important was there. And after the victory over Jericho, Yahweh and the archangels never appeared in person before people again. That is, they most likely achieved their goal. So what was this goal then? Andrei Sklerov believed that the goal was specifically in the palace coup among the gods. And this is not without meaning, considering that, having lost their connection with their creators and the ability to live freely on the surface, the Titans began to invent ways to continue to rule remotely. The episode with Aeneas demonstrates this well. Venus, also known as Aphrodite, gave birth to him from a relationship with a common man. Seemingly by chance, however, during the Trojan War, he was the only one whom the gods saved. And the first time he was saved by Aphrodite herself. With Apollo, the second time he was saved by Poseidon. Having fought on the opposing side, that is, he took it from his own warrior Achilles, and saved, and after the miraculous salvation, and the gods continued to watch over his family. Mars himself added some extra divine blood to him. He sired children of his great-granddaughters who later founded Rome. So it's clear that the gods' plans were to create ruling dynasties of people. In fact, Yahweh himself could not stay on the surface for long, and if he wanted to rule something on earth, he also needed a ruling dynasty of people. Obviously, for his manifestation by Moses, he somehow got or created some mechanism, in which he himself moved or his hologram, with the help of which he communicated with Moses, Archangel Michael, who was present at the battle for Jericho, and other angels who are constantly in the tent. They were most likely workers with a limited term of service and functionality. So what were they looking for on the surface? What could some artifacts help them with? Let's try to go a little further. First, let's pay attention to the skin, which constantly stayed with the Jewish people during the period of wandering in the desert. The Ark of the Covenant was constantly in it, and a pair of angels who were constantly there for 40 years adjusting and regulating something. That's what you want to say. But I don't believe in my life that the gods were not able to adjust their own mechanism, let alone in the course of such a long time, especially since the camp was constantly moving from place to place. And at each new place, everything was new and a new setup. Many researchers have noted the origin of the model. Ski with an antenna inside which stood a transmitter, the Ark of the Covenant, with the help of which Moses repeatedly communicated with Yahweh at a distance. That is, the ski was clearly some kind of signal amplifier for the Ark. But Moses' connection with God happened through it. Not so often, but nonetheless, the skin always worked. So its main purpose is something else. And possibly here lies the mystery. Look, the skin was a wideband antenna amplifying the signal. And the shepherd was some kind of radio receiver, so the angels in the skin were not just messing with the settings. They were looking for a specific signal in a certain range. Finding the signal and presumably determining its intensity, the camp moved to another place and the operation was repeated. Then it moved to the third, and the operation was repeated again. I think the military or radio enthusiasts have already guessed what I'm getting at. The only thing this resembles is peeling, searching for the signal source using triangulation. At a minimum, 3 points are needed for this, but the more the better. And judging by the fact that the measurements were taken 40 years ago, the point itself did not move anywhere. However, the signal was very weak. If it were in space or on the surface of the Earth, such a search operation would take a couple of hours, at most a week. But apparently the signal was very weak, so it took so much time and effort. Nevertheless, the source of the signal was found, then Jericho and Yahweh disappeared with the angels. More precisely, he disappeared from the sight of the chosen people, but not from history. Pyramids. Many historians note that in the Old Testament and in the Bible in general, Egyptian pyramids are never mentioned. Historians mumble something unclear on this topic, trying to justify it by, for example, the fact that their mentions were lost. But there are no pyramids even on the not so old maps, for example, world maps of the 16th, 17th centuries. They are also not there. The idol of the Golden Woman, located somewhere far in the wild Yakutia, exists, but there are no pyramids. Besides, we know that all, without exception, ancient and antique buildings are calculated for a man of 3 meters and above, that is for titans and giants. However, for example, the sarcophagus in the king's chamber in the Great Pyramid of Cheops is calculated for a man slightly less than 2 meters tall. In other words, the pyramids appeared quite recently, when there were no titans and gods, and they served for modern people, not for gods. But they were clearly not created by people or people possessing the technologies and knowledge of the gods. And they clearly have some kind of purpose. One of the first to notice that the pyramids have a great similarity to rubble antennas was the now deceased Professor Sergei Siparov, who worked in Andrei Skliarov's team and apparently passed many of his ideas on to him. He noticed that the pyramids work beautifully as a detector of some kind of signal.
In 2004 year, when the filming of this remarkable film took place, measurements were also taken, in which even I had the pleasure to participate. And it turned out that the pyramid works beautifully as a kind of detector. Seismic measurements were carried out there, and it turned out that there is some seismic noise under the ground. And the pyramid isolates and amplifies several frequencies. This amplification is very healthy by many times over. 20 to 30 times, I don't remember exactly, but something of that order of magnitude. That's it. That's good. It means she can do it. So this assumption that it's some kind of detector, amplifier, or something else, this assumption can be this fact. It's a fact confirmed. So we can assume that the pyramid is a funnel that directs certain frequencies of seismic noise. Now, in addition to the fact that we have seismic waves, there are granite details in this pyramid, and their quantity varies in different pyramids. Sometimes it's a complete cladding, for example, in the pyramid of Mykirene. Sometimes it's a stripe at the bottom. Sometimes there are granite parts in some inlays, inside, in the remote chambers, in the remote corridors, elements of the corridors. In general, speaking briefly, there are granite materials there. Granite material is a piezoelectric substance. A substance with a piezoelectric effect means that the seismic activity that can exist causes electrical phenomena, ethical voltages. This means that at the end of such a thing, the electrical signal is transformed into an electromagnetic one, and this is also a fact. The question is, can it be used, and for what can it also be imagined? So this is how a standard report is structured when an antenna, a report that is used by radio technicians. So these parameters, the opening of this pipe, so to speak, are laid down depending on the purpose, on the interrelation where the waveguide is and where the horn is, also depending on the purpose, for example. Such things are used, the whole background between, by the way, removed accidentally, this is a radio telescope. All the components like waveguides, sensitive elements, detectors, and others are implied. There is inside the beam, so you can also arrange an antenna. We know, right? It is directed inward.
It turns out there are actually some noises happening under the pyramids, and the design of the pyramids is such that with the help of waveguides, which are the passages inside them, all the extra noises are filtered out, leaving one specific signal. Then it is amplified in the gallery resonator and apparently fed into the sarcophagus, where the seance of connection not with Yahweh takes place. And with the surviving titans in the underground enclave of Egypt, that is, in order to build such a pyramid antenna, you need to know not only the characteristics of the signal, but also ideally place it exactly above it. And then focus on it, because the stone walls of the pyramid are not just to make change their angle. For this, a thorough signal penetration was needed over many years, to then immediately build a pyramid with the necessary angles in the right place. Exactly above the bunker, however, the obvious fact is that the pyramid's antenna, directed downwards, it didn't please someone, possibly Andrei Skliarov himself, who, with all his might, denied the extraterrestrial origin of the group of gods. Therefore, over time, Sergei Separov, Andrei Skliarov, and the entire laboratory of alternative history began to give out some nonsense about the pyramids being directed upwards and acting as a beacon. I can't understand what could have made engineers, physicists, professors give out such wild and obvious nonsense. But the fact remains a fact. The sad irony of fate is that in the end, these are indeed extraterrestrial civilizations, but they are not in space, but under the ground.
It is directed inside the earth. Yes, revealing, directed well. Where should it be directed? The pyramid stands on the earth, what to talk about? So there is some kind of this construction inside, which we saw on the previous slide here. It is the same. I am thinking about some kind of connection and trying to think of what it is needed for on earth. I don't see why, so I assume that this can be done for connection with some kind of proximity to some kind of cosmic space on earth. I don't see why. It is directed inside the earth, though I don't understand why. It is directed inside the earth. I don't understand why.
It's clear to any engineer, including Separov, that the pyramid's antenna is directed inside the earth, but he can't see what the purpose could be on earth. That's why the goal is in space. And it's ridiculous to think that a downward-facing antenna could work in such a mode simply because its beam is directed downwards. No beams can essentially come out from the top of the pyramid, but with an incredible force of will he tries to convey his flawed idea, fully understanding that antennas and lighthouses don't work that way, using his authority to push this distorted thought at 180 degrees. That is, the pyramids were created as a means of communication with the deep enclave, or the Titans, or even more powerful creators. This literally explains everything. Firstly, it explains what exactly was trying to enthrall Yahweh's skin in the Arabian desert. She was trying to triangulate not just a point on the map from where the signal is coming. She was trying to triangulate how deep it is located, and this is possibly due to the curvature of the Earth's surface hundreds of kilometers away from Egypt. In other words, after the Jews conquered Jericho for Yahweh, he went off to build pyramids. But most likely, he chose another people for this purpose, since the Jews too often and strongly tempted him. It was impossible to rely on them, and I can confidently assert that the pyramids were built by one of the European civilizations which were more reliable for such work than those whom Moses led out. Although the opus of Titan Mahia has long been lost, records of it have been preserved by other ancient Greek authors, and they contain quite contradictory evidence. In particular, it turns out that for some time the Titans under the command of Kronos and the Olympians, led by Zeus, coexisted. But the number of those dissatisfied with Zeus grew, and Hera, rejected by Zeus, provoked a war. It's unclear who started first, but the Olympians started the war by destroying the Titans of Egypt who were engaged in setting up the sky, that is, simply repairing the underground dome. He could quite possibly shake places, covering the exit to the surface, burying everyone else inside. Nevertheless, they did not perish, and judging by the signals, they are still doing some work. Prometheus was initially on their side, but apparently knowing through his gift that there would be no victory, he switched to the side of Zeus. However, he never received gratitude, being chained to a rock, and although in the end he still told Zeus that his son from his marriage with Thetis would kill him. But I believe Prometheus got off easy. In fact, it was he who ultimately instigated the war against Zeus, which, by the way, is still going on to this day. So let's compare what we know about Prometheus and Yahweh. Prometheus is Zeus's brother-in-law. Shalim, whom Skylarov suspected to be Yahweh, is the biological brother of the god Baal. The Greek Zeus and the Sumerian Baal are the same god. Prometheus convinced Zeus to accept only the bones and fat from sacrificial animals and to give the meat to the people. Yahweh repeatedly told Moses and Aaron about the importance of burning fat during their desert wanderings, and the meat was to be eaten by the people. Prometheus had the gift of clairvoyance and prophecy, which even Zeus did not have. Yahweh vehemently denies the existence of such a gift in anyone but himself. Prometheus created humans from clay and water. Yahweh also created humans from clay. The main center of Catholic Christianity bears the name of the Roman analog of Prometheus, the Vatican, and stands on a hill dedicated to Prometheus, inside of which are catacombs leading to an unknown depth, part of which is filled with manuscripts and books in which the entire history of the world. Does any one of you know why the holy fire descends in Jerusalem on Easter? What does Jesus or Yahweh have to do with this at all? Not related at all. But it is a symbol of Prometheus and one of his main feats, the gift of fire to people. And if it's a reminder of his gift, it makes a lot of sense. Moreover, Prometheus has a beautiful motive to strive so hard to establish a connection with the Egyptian underworld. It's all very simple. His brother Atlas, who holds the dome there, is still there. He needs to be saved. And one more interesting fact for good measure, not long ago we had the Winter Olympics in Sochi in our country. And it would be fine, any Olympics in any country is always grand and pompous. But that Winter Olympics was special. A huge Olympic torch and Olympic village were built at the foot of the fished mountain. Nothing special, just Prometheus was chained to this mountain. And next to it, they put a giant torch, symbolizing the fire that Prometheus himself gave to people. How do you like the symbolism? But we'll talk about this in other episodes.